Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's the Drunken Kobold here with the review of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. So before we begin, I just want to note, at the time of this review, none of this has been confirmed legal for Adventures League. So if I mention Adventures League, take it with a grain of salt that the option will actually be there. So you'll be noticing I'm reviewing the regular cover of Tasha's. That's because my LGS hasn't received their shipments of Tasha's yet. I've already pre-ordered and prepaid my alt art copy at my LGS, so I don't feel so bad about getting this from Indigo to do this review. But please people, support your LGS, and if your game store is having delays in getting it, just hold out, it will be worth it. Now, you may notice that there was a lack of discussion about Tasha's on the channel in regards to speculation and leaks, and that's because to me, nothing is final until it's in paper and on the shelf. I'd hate to get people hyped up for something that isn't going to be there. But it is here now, and boy is it a doozy. So while this isn't officially D&D 5.5, it brings some major overhauls to the rules as we know them, and adds a ton of new features to the game that, in addition to the existing PHP, that if they were to publish both as a book, it would be a decent 5.5. So that said, let's jump in and review Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. So right away, we were given a using this book as a preface, which explains the 10 rules of D&D that I'm guessing are most brought up as ruling questions, and it reminds you to have fun with it. I think this little bit was really well placed, since all these things are going to be coming up frequently in the new rules for Tasha. It also makes sure to remind us that this book is entirely optional. None of these are set in stone rules that are steadfast like the PHP, and the DM can use as many or as few of them as they choose. Chapter 1 is your new character options. The first part is customizing your origin. Here is where we find the biggest source of controversy leading up to the release of this book, and how it handles ability score increases from races. Prior to being announced, I was an advocate for moving ability score increases to the background selection of character development. However, I think making it fluid, that if your character has, say, a +2 in intelligence and a +1 in wisdom, you can put those scores anywhere, as long as you pick 2 different scores to increase, i.e. you can't put a +3 in wisdom. I do wish that instead it gave it the option to take your total modifiers, generally +3, and dividing them how you choose up to a maximum of +2, so that if you wanted to put a +1 in 3 abilities you could, but this is still a pretty decent system. It's way more flexible than 5e was prior, and is even more flexible than the system in Pathfinder 2e that I've come to love as of late. Languages are now as flexible as your ability scores. You can swap out any languages you know for any of the following languages: Abyssal, Celestial, Common, Deep Speech, Draconic, Dwarvish, Elvish, Giant, Gnomish, Goblin, Halfling, Infernal, Orc, Primordial, Sylvan, or Undercommon. You can in theory start a Tiefling that only speaks Abyssal and Infernal and knows no Common tongue. This is similar to how if a background gives you a feature you already have from your race or class, you may swap it out for something equivalent. This also applies to the proficiencies of your race. The information on how to swap out proficiencies from backgrounds is now presented as a clean table in Chapter 1. I, for one, am loving that races are truly customizable from the ground up. As a variant to the variant rules, because that makes sense, there are options to creating custom lineages on page 8. The next is the changes we can make to our classes as they level up. This gives guidance on choosing new skills for characters in character creation, as well as changing your subclasses. I really like that while it is an option to change them when appropriate, the book makes suggestions that work the changes into the game and makes it feel like the character has actually earned that change, but does give guidance for sudden changes such as to a Paladin's Oath. All in all, I'm quite neutral about this section. I feel like skills and subclass options are something that should be a concrete choice the players make, and if you are no longer feeling your choices, you can retire your character or have them killed off. By being able to switch them, it makes it feel like a talent tree in an MMO, and the game feeling like an MMO is one of the biggest complaints of 4e. The only thing that redeems these options is that they have given guidance on how to incorporate the change into gameplay, and give costs associated with the change, and it's not something that can be done at will. Next are the actual classes. First, let's give a round of applause as we welcome Artificer to the Forgotten Realms. This is sure to be a welcome addition to Adventures League players who for the past couple seasons have only been able to play Artificer in the Eberron campaigns. This is the Artificer that is in Eberron Rising of the Last War, except for the Armorer subclass, which is new from Unearthed Arcana earlier this year. This has all the up-to-date erratas, so Tasha's is at the moment the best source for the up-to-date Artificer for both settings. Next, we have the updates to the old classes. Barbarian gets Path of the Beast and Path of Wild Magic from Unearthed Arcana. Bards get College of Eloquence from the Theros MTG crossover and College of Creation from Unearthed Arcana. Clerics get the Ordered Domain from the Ravnica MTG crossover and the Peace and Twilight domains from Unearthed Arcana. Druids get the Circle of Spores from the Ravnica MTG crossover and Circle of Stars and Circle of Wildfire from Unearthed Arcana. Fighters get the Psy Warrior and Rune Knight from Unearthed Arcana. They also have a stock of new maneuvers for the Battle Master, as well as they give a section called Battle Master Builds, where it gives a breakdown of 12 different themes you can build with the Battle Master subclass. I really never want to hear that human fighters are boring again after this. Monk was given Way of Mercy and Way of Astral Self from the Unearthed Arcana. Paladin was given Oath of Glory from Theros MTG crossover, and Oath of the Watchers from the Unearthed Arcana. Ranger was given Fey Wanderer and Swarmkeeper from Unearthed Arcana, and was given Beastmaster Companions feature Primal Companions, which replaces the Ranger's Companion feature in the Beastmaster subclass in the PHP. The Rogue was given the Phantom and Soul Knife subclasses from Unearthed Arcana. The Sorcerer was given Aberrant Mind and Clockwork Soul from Unearthed Arcana. The Warlock was given new Eldritch Invocations, as well as the Fathomless and the Genie Patrons from Unearthed Arcana. The Wizard was given the Blade Singing reprint from Swords Coast Adventurer's Guide, as well as the Order of the Scribes from Unearthed Arcana. In addition, each class was given a series of optional class features. These features are, as the title suggests, completely optional, and you can use as many or as few of them as you want. Optional class features are divided into 3 categories: expansion, add-on, and replacement. Expansion class features are identified by them saying that when the character has a choice of options at a certain level, they may also choose from the following selection of options. These are by far the easiest options to incorporate into your game, as they are just more choices the player has and add to the amount of customization the characters have. Next, we'll discuss replacement. These simply are abilities that, if chosen, replace another ability from the existing class or subclass. On my read-throughs, none of the replacement feats lock you into ongoing changes to your class, i.e. if you choose this feat also has to be replaced. But, as I've only read a couple of times and haven't committed this book to memory, that may happen, but both of these are really easy to incorporate, as they don't add more to the class, just expand the options available to the player. Next, we have add-on feats, which by far might have been Wizards of the Coast's craziest idea to date. I am so on the fence about this. Here is why. Add-on feats are feats that are added to the core class, whether they gained a feat at that level or not. For instance, rogues, other than choosing their roguish archetype at level 3, do not have any core class abilities that they gain at this level under normal circumstances. The optional class feature of the rogue not only gives them the first feat of their roguish archetype at this level, it gives them the steady aim as a rogue feat at level 3, and they lose nothing for it. In addition to classes gaining features when they previously didn't, some classes get to double up on features when they hit certain levels. For example, at 4th level, the Cleric gains Cantrip Versatility. This class feature allows the Cleric to swap a cantrip with another one from the Cleric spell list whenever they would have ability score improvement. This feature does not replace your ASI, so you can swap cantrips and boost your abilities at the same time, or add a feat if your DM is using the optional feats rules. Add-on feats are an option I feel was not playtested extensively enough, and because they are optional, I have a feeling are going to have a lot of DMs saying, this optional feat is allowed, but this one isn't, or if you want this feat, you have to be willing to cut a non-optional feat in home games. How this will work in Adventures League, I have zero clue. All in all, the class section of this book is great. The add-on feats are a little iffy in my opinion, and while they are great, well-designed features here, I don't know how well they work with the game balance-wise, and I will remain neutral on them. Because there are so many subclasses in this book, I will, over time, do a video for each class describing the subclasses and how they stack up to the original source materials, as well as any changes or erratas that were made. Lastly, to round out character options, we will discuss feats. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything introduced 15 new feats to the game to add to the customization of 5e. A lot of these feats feel like nerfed class feats, so that if you want a piece of a class without having to multi-class, you can, and makes the good feats of 3.5 feel like they're present again in 5e. However, there are a couple dead feats here that I feel were simply added for what I call the illusion of choice. And one thing I always stress is customization options should always be meaningful. The fact that Tasha's doesn't let us swap feats whenever we have an ASI is surprising, since it lets us swap so much other stuff out. However, I have to say this is something I'm glad they did not add. Feats are definitely something that should be a set-in-stone choice. The character options chapter gets 7.5 out of 10 from me. I feel the inability to divide scores how you choose takes away from the fluidity that Wizards of the Coast was trying to achieve. The ability to make swaps on your skills and subclasses is a huge downer for me, as this, as mentioned, makes 5e feel more like an MMO to me. The new subclasses, as well as meaningful reprints, is welcomed, as is the replacement and expansion class features. However, I'm not sold on add-on feats. And finally, the new feats that can replace your ASI are flavorful and for the most part impactful. Just some major glaring flaws in this chapter that just don't do it for me. Chapter 2 introduces us to group patrons. I will do a future video breaking down the individual group patrons. However, for now, all I have to say is I love the idea of a sole benefactor, whether it's a god, ancient being, a sole proprietor, or an organization giving the party their purpose, goals, and possibly funding. The fact that the player can be or become their own patron is also a really cool aspect of this chapter, and I feel this does a really good job of expanding on the patrons idea we got in Eberron and the guilds we got in the Ravnica book. This is overall a very short, very simple, but very effective chapter to add some new life to your D&D games. I have to give this chapter a solid 9 out of 10. The only thing I would have liked to see is a little bit of guidance on adding the old patrons from Eberron to your Forgotten Realms and Beyond campaigns, but this is pretty doable without it in being in the book. Chapter 3 is the Magic Miscellany chapter. This chapter has the cantrips from Swords Coast Adventurer's Guide reprinted with their current erratas. Some of these erratas were already how I wrote the spells in my games from a logistics point of view, and these are just the rules as intended becoming the rules as written as far as I'm concerned. So while this has no effect on my game or my characters, each of these spells has been by Raw nerfed. If you're playing a home game, this has no effect on you, as you can rule using Swords Coast Adventurer's Guide if you wish, but in AL, it is important to note that if Tasha's is your +1 book, these spells have had significant wording changes done to them that won't be reflected in Swords Coast of Adventurer's Guide or the spellbook cards if your player is using them. There is also a new slew of spells that are added to make your caster builds more exciting, more lethal, and for the DM, more unpredictable. Next is the personalizing spells section. This is something I have always allowed players to do as long as it doesn't change the actual effect of the spell. So seeing something that I've been allowing both in my AL tables and my home game since day one, now codified as an option, makes me feel good as a dungeon master. Lastly is the magic items, which encompasses traditional magic items as we all know, and magic tattoos. I do wish that Magic Tattoos was its own dedicated section of the Magical Miscellany chapter, as I feel these are going to be really popular magic items rather than a description of what they are, and then each tattoo is thrown in with the rest of the magic items, but it is what it is, and overall it's just great to see tattoos added to the game. Between tattoos and Rune Knights, I'm seeing some major Shadowhunter Chronicle vibes here, and I can't wait to build a themed campaign around them. The only thing I would have liked to see added is a compendium of campaign unique magic items so that DMs have access to those items as so desired without having to own and scour the modules. This chapter gets an 8 out of 10 from me, and I'm really liking what I see here, both as a player and as a dungeon master. Lastly, we have Dungeon Master's tools in Chapter 4. I am automatically biased to not liking this chapter because I don't like books that are part player options and part dungeon master options. And I feel like not only is this a really short chapter at 50 pages, it's a chapter that belongs in a separate book strictly for the DM, like many of the tools in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Since this has been the trend since the release of Swords Coast Adventurer's Guide, I feel like Wizards will never give us a book that's dedicated to just player options, and a book that's just dedicated to DM tools, unless we get 2 books that are strictly reprinted material, at which point it'll feel like a slap in the face from Wizards of the Coast. So I can only hope that the changes when we inevitably get to D&D 6e. But, from a business standpoint, this makes sense as both players and DMs alike will be buying this book, whereas a DM-only book would have lackluster sales during its print run. That rant aside, the DM tools here are kind of lackluster, with the standouts being Session 0, parlaying with monsters to add a better roleplay aspect to the game, and puzzles. I actually am a huge fan of parlaying with monsters because it gives the monsters we see in the monster manual, Volos, etc. a bit more depth and ways to interact with them. But this makes it feel like this book belongs in a book of monsters rather than a book of new rules. Regardless of how out of place it feels, I really love this section. I'll be sure to be using in conjunction with The Monsters Know What They're Doing by Keith Ammon, and make every encounter as diverse and epic as possible. So why do I feel this book is only decent? If you don't follow Unearthed Arcana for whatever reason, a lot of this book will feel fresh and exciting. But between the reprints and the fact that this is just finalized Unearthed Arcana, nothing here feels new. This feels like the greatest hits collection of much better books in Unearthed Arcana. There was a lot of really popular Arcana articles that, though they didn't playtest well, should have been revamped and improved to make the cut for Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and so much from the reprint sources didn't get included. Player options had no new races or reprinted races from any of the source books, and a lot of Swords Coast Adventurer's Guide between Xanathar's and Tasha's feels like it's been left on the cutting room floor, never to be seen again, as Swords Coast Adventurer's Guide will inevitably go out of print. Secondly, Tasha's feels short. At only 192 pages of content, it's comparable to the Swords Coast Adventurer's Guide with only 152 pages of content, and Xanathar's at 192 pages also. I feel like books that want to claim the title of everything need to be a bit more comprehensive, especially as these books are getting more expensive to buy in foreign markets. I would have much preferred if this book was strictly Unearthed Arcana material rather than reprints included, as I've already paid for the reprint options. It's like opening a pack of magic cards and Shivan Dragon is your rare. Ouch. I'm hoping the next book from Wizards of the Coast is a strong monster options book. We have a lot of monsters from the modules which have yet to see a manual, and lots of classic monsters which have yet to be printed into D&D 5e. I don't want any player options from this book, just lots of monsters. If the next book is a book of player options and or DM tools, give us something we've never seen. Give us nothing from old books or Unearthed Arcana. Surprise us. In the meantime, Tasha's gets a 7 out of 10 for the reasons discussed above in the chapter breakdowns and my overall opinions of what content was delivered here. It's not great, but it's not bad either. It's just above average with a decent feel. Do you agree with my assessment, or do you feel I'm way off the mark? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you feel I deserve it, leave a like and consider subscribing. Until next time, cheers, and as always, may the rolls be with you.